You're listening to The Rewatchables 1999 from Luminary Media. I'm your host, Sean Fennessy, and I'm joined by Amanda Dobbins. Coming up, some people say I'm an overachiever, but I think they're just jealous. Election, right now.
We'll move on now to the presidential race with three candidates running. The first is Tracy Flick.
One thing that's important to know about me is that I'm an only child. My mom is really devoted to me. She likes to write letters to successful women like Elizabeth Dole and Connie Chung and ask them what advice do they have for me, Tracy, her daughter.
The next candidate for student body president is Paul Metzler.
I just don't think somebody would do something like that on purpose.
Cast your vote for Tracy Flick next week. You won't just be voting for me.
You suck!
You'll be voting for yourself.
Paramount Pictures presents an MTV Films production.
Order! Order!
Starring Matthew Broderick, Reese Witherspoon.
Hey, what happened to your eye?
What happened to your eye? Are you okay, Mr. McAllister?
I'm fine.
On the road to greatness. Never underestimate an overachiever.
Looks like you could use a cupcake.
Election. Cast your vote.
Or don't vote at all!
Amanda, welcome to the Election Rewatchables 1999 podcast. Would you say right off the top that you are in fact a Tracy Flick?
Yes, I mean, that's why I'm on this podcast, right? Because of all the people at The Ringer, I was chosen to channel and defend Tracy Flick.
Knowing me as you do, would you say that, am I a Tracy Flick?
Yes, also.
Oh my.
Well, I mean, who do you want to be in this movie if not Tracy Flick?
In the expanded election universe?
Yeah.
Certainly not Mr. Novotny.
Sure.
I don't think I want to be Chris Klein's character.
No.
I don't think that I'm a Tammy Metzler. I'm not a chaos agent.
Okay.
I guess I am closest to a Flick.
Yeah.
We're picking Flick here on the Rewatchables. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data points around the movie Election, which of course was released in 1999. It was directed by Alexander Payne and written by Payne and his longtime writing partner, Jim Taylor. It's based on the novel Election by Tom Perrotta, which we'll be getting into a little bit on this show. The cast: Matthew Broderick, Reese Witherspoon, Chris Klein, Jessica Campbell, Phil Reeves, and Molly Hagan. This is the first ever appearance of Chris Klein on camera, as well as Jessica Campbell. The studio of this movie is Paramount and also MTV Productions, which I think is a meaningful note. There have not been a ton of movies from MTV over the years, and this being one of them might be the reason why. It was released April 23rd, 1999. It had a budget of $25 million, and it made $17 million. There were some awards.
Mm-hmm.
Reese Witherspoon earned a Golden Globe nomination for her performance in this movie. Payne and co-writer Jim Taylor grabbed an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. And the movie took home Best Film at the Independent Spirit Awards. It's got a Rotten Tomatoes score of 92%, which, as we know, means what, Amanda?
Nothing.
Nothing. It means nothing. 3.5 stars from my homie Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
The big homie Raj. This is what Raj wrote. Now, here is a movie that is simply not about an obnoxious student, but also about an imperfect teacher, a lockstep administration, and a student body that is mostly just marking time until it can go out into the world and occupy valuable space. The movie is not mean-spirited about any of its characters. I kind of liked Tracy Flick some of the time and even felt a little sorry for her. Payne doesn't enjoy easy targets and cheap shots. What he's aiming for, I think, is a parable for elections in general, in which the voters have to choose from among the kinds of people who have been running for office ever since high school. Let's talk about Election, Amanda.
Okay.
Where were you when you first saw Election?
I was trying to remember because I don't think it was in 1999 because I don't think I was sophisticated enough at the age of, I guess it would have been 14 turning 15 in 1999 for this movie, which is a bit more adult than I remembered.
Me too.
Upon rewatching. And I think that is to its credit. It is what makes it not just another teen comedy. And also,
nicely done.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I would have seen it in college, though I'm trying to remember whether the idea of Tracy Flick entered my consciousness before this movie. I think it's possible.
Is it plausible that someone called you Tracy Flick before you saw the movie?
Well, not in my high school because I went to high school with a bunch of like uncool dummies who never would have seen this movie, which is both me being Tracy Flick and all of them being Chris Klein. So possibly in college.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it became something in the consciousness. I don't know whether I was like called Tracy Flick before I, as a super type A young woman, like attached myself to the idea of Tracy Flick as a kind of, which became a thing, that she became a phenomenon and was both a way of explaining how to be a young woman in the world, but also kind of like a defense. It's okay to be like this, and it could be worse. You could be Tracy Flick.
You could be. Here's a very brief synopsis of the story of this movie, which, you know, these synopses never actually tell us what's going on, but I'm going to read it to you and you tell me how you feel about this. The high school class president election is approaching and it looks like overachiever Tracy Flick is going to win unopposed. However, teacher Jim McAllister has other plans. He convinces jock Paul Metzler to run, sparking off an interesting chain of events. I think that that's sort of what the movie is about. I think it doesn't really address like any of the subtextual aspects of relationships between men and women that suffuse the movie, and especially between older people and younger people, and who knows best. When you were in high school, did you think you knew better than all of the older people?
Oh, that's a complicated question. I mean, I'm sure I did in some way. It's funny, my aunt and uncle were in town just the other night, and they got to the inevitable portion of the evening where they talk about you when you're little. And the first thing they said to me was like, you were quite bossy. So
shocking.
Yeah. And I was like, well, that nothing has changed. I suppose I did, though. I do think in high school, at least, I both thought I knew better and was really consumed with following the rules, and that a very Tracy Flick mentality of doing what you're supposed to do and doing it better than everybody else, but coloring within the lines. So that betrays some sort of belief in the authority figures, at least, or some idea that people know enough of, older people know what they're saying, or at least that you should listen to them, even if maybe they aren't always right. Does that make any sense?
It does. When you first got into this movie, did it feel like, was there a high level of identification in it, or was it more just in the realm of that kind of teen comedy that we were experiencing? Because this is the time of kind of Freddie Prinze Jr., you know, those were the movies that were dominating. She's All That, and Not Another Teen Movie, and Can't Hardly Wait,
and Cruel Intentions.
Cruel Intentions, 10 Things I Hate About You. You know, that period was very rich. And it was one of the reasons why originally Alexander Payne didn't want to make this movie, because he was concerned about making yet another high school movie. Did you sense that this was somehow different from that whole crop of films?
Yes. And I think that's why I didn't see it at the time, because I definitely saw 10 Things I Hate About You in the theaters. And I think it was maybe not even marketed to a 14-year-old girl in high school. That's clearly not the target audience of the movie, rewatching it. But I think at the time, I understood that there was something different. And I think when I finally did watch it, it was presented to me as kind of like a classic, a film nerd kind of, oh, this is a subversion of the genre. This is for grown-ups. This is for people who are in the know. Yeah,
it was funny reading about the movie. I quickly learned that MTV and Paramount didn't really realize what they had on their hands after they made it. You know, they made it, they produced it. Payne took a long period of time to edit it. I think he took over a year and a half to edit it, shot it in 97, and then had this long post-production period trying to figure out what the right tone would be for the movie. And Paramount and MTV thought that they did have a teen comedy, and then they put it out in the world, and they realized that critics loved it, and that it had a great deal of admiration, but that they weren't quite hitting the core demo that they had identified. And on the one hand, it made it a kind of a failure. This movie basically lost money, and yet here we are 20 years later celebrating it, as is so often the case. This one is surprising to me, though, because of what you said. It's not only is it very adult, it's like a bit crude. Not crudely made, but just some of the themes and some of the events. And it's a little bit gross, and it's a little bit ridiculous, and it's still satire, and it still works really well. And it's not hard to see how they're attacking the American political system under the construct of a high school movie. But I was a little taken aback by the kind of like, just like purely sexual humor happening in the movie.
Yes. I had forgotten it. And I was also, speaking of the political system commentary, and when it was released in 1999, which I realized is like the height of the Lewinsky scandal. And there are absolutely overtones of this in terms of older man, younger woman, and how it inflects what is a political scandal. And you would think that it would have resonance for like an older audience.
Yeah, it's funny. So Tom Perrotta, who wrote the novel, the backstory behind that is kind of fascinating. He writes this novel in 1992, 1993. He's reflecting on the 1992 presidential race. And if you look at the movie, you can see the rough outline. You can see that there is a George W. Bush and Mr. McAllister is sort of like prim, proper morals and ethics guy who's maybe got something a little bit more devious under the surface. You've got Bill Clinton, who is I guess sort of the Tracy Flick of this thing. Maybe I have it inverted. Maybe they're the reverse. That maybe Mr. McAllister is the Bill Clinton and maybe Tracy Flick is the George H.W. Bush. It's possible. And then there's Tammy is the chaos agent, the Ross Perot figure. And Tom Perrotta writes this book, gives it to his agent. His agent reads it, and she says, "This is not good. Put this away forever. Put this in a drawer. This isn't the one. Go back and write another one." Somewhere along the way, it found its way into the hands of two producers, and two producers then went scouting for people to make the film, and then ultimately the book was published, and then ultimately became a success. But Perrotta knew a little bit about Clinton and Jennifer Flowers and some of the affairs that he did or did not have, which was reported on a lot in '92 and the run up to the election, but not to the Lewinsky extent of things. And so over time, the movie ends up making more sense as a document of this period in American political history. And I guess it was like a pretty lascivious moment in tabloid political journalism.
Yes. And we didn't have any of the hang-ups or the political correctness, possibly for the better, that we have now. People were just, the way that Monica Lewinsky was covered in 1999 has spawned a whole series of podcasts now. It's just hand-wringing of the willingness to share details and treat her without any sort of context as to her age, her power or lack of power, as the case may be. People just didn't have any shame at all.
Yeah, and the movie has a lot of nuance about that, and we'll probably get into that a little bit. It's not black and white, and it doesn't feel like it's operating in the same space as, say, like the Me Too movement is happening. You know, there's, in Tom Perrotta's novel, Tracy Flick is actually even more sexualized and even more of a manipulator, and the movie kind of pulls back on some of that, and then that leaves a little bit of a gray area to analyze. This is really the first time I think people got interested in the idea of Reese Witherspoon. And she's, I think, safe to say, your patron saint.
Yeah, probably.
She'd made a few movies before this. She made a movie called The Man in the Moon, and then she made a movie called Freeway. Have you seen Freeway?
Is that the one with No, Fear is the roller coaster one.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Freeway is a extraordinarily fucked up reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood, in which Reese Witherspoon plays Little Red Riding Hood as a kind of like fast prostitute. And Kiefer Sutherland plays the big bad wolf in pursuit of her.
I haven't seen this. I know about this, though.
Very damaged movie that sticks with me that was on HBO all the time in the 90s as well. And I guess that Alexander Payne saw that movie and cast her on the strength of that performance. Riff on Reese. Like, what do you think about Reese entering your life with this movie?
Well, this is the urtext for Reese. This is when her persona and her acting career flips from, for the most part, teen movies and being the, Cruel Intentions, which comes out like 3 or 4 months, maybe even 2 months before.
Yep.
She is playing the innocent, the person who Ryan Phillippe falls in love with and also like tries to seduce. And she's sweet, and she's got a little bit of a bite because she's Reese Witherspoon and she can't help it. But she's just kind of like this straight and narrow leading teen, I guess. And Election is when all of the type A anger, pettiness, like the real Reese snaps into place. And you can almost see it physically in the way she's learning to rearrange her face and using that for comedy. And she's letting out just a lot of ambition and like meanness and like ugliness, like inner ugliness. I mean, I think she's very attractive in this movie and in all her movies. And that throughout the rest of her career is when Reese is her best. What I loved about Big Little Lies was that in a lot of ways that Madeline character was a return to petty Reese, to election, to the ugly stuff. And, she became like a hugely successful actress, and you don't get to be a hugely successful actress by playing only unlikable characters. But it's what makes like Legally Blonde or Walk the Line or any of the iconic Reese movies performances interesting, is that you can see the Tracy Flick, the type A, the edge, like creeping out of her. She can't really help it.
Yeah, her age is really interesting here too, because basically in succession, what you get is Election and then Pleasantville and Cruel Intentions. And she basically makes all three of these movies when she's 21 years old. So she's pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
She's not very far removed from the machinations of all three of those characters. All three of those characters are high school characters. All three of them are, 20% sweet, 80% something else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Cruel Intentions is a little bit more sweet, though things eventually change as the film goes on.
Yeah, but she's the moral conscious of that movie.
Right. And it's kind of fascinating because I wonder if she never got this movie, if she would have the same kind of career. Not would she be less successful. I think she was always going to be successful. She was a successful child actor before this movie. But it's so iconographic and iconoclastic that it leads to a movie like Walk the Line being a surprise. That like playing June Carter Cash being, and the warmth of that character and the kind of determination, but this like sweetness of that character being almost like an impressive act of acting.
Yeah.
As opposed to something like this, which feels, I think we assume that Reese is just kind of like Tracy Flick. That she's kind of tough and hard-nosed and committed and driven and doesn't want anybody to stand in her way. We've seen the very famous video of her being pulled over by a police officer. We know about some of her exploits off screen. She's not afraid to mix it up and to say what she thinks about things. And so it's just so fascinating. It's a little bit of a sliding doors moment where if she hadn't done this, maybe her career moves in a different direction.
I think so. And I think the way that you receive everything from Legally Blonde to Sweet Home Alabama to Walk the Line changes, as you said. I mean, imagine Legally Blonde, in which she plays a ditz and in a lot of ways is sending up both our idea of what a sorority girl idiot is and also what a serious law student is. But imagine her playing the ditz without knowing in the back of your mind, but actually she has this really accomplished Tracy Flick aspect to her, and this is a joke, and it makes that character more accessible to more people. And I agree that if she's just playing sweet Southern people all the time, she starts to sing more fake, without Tracy Flick. Tracy Flick somehow gives her a level of, she's not just like the Southern belle who runs a clothing line and, posts things on Instagram about how I have to have my coffee first thing in the morning, which Reese Witherspoon really does. But knowing there is this darker side there makes her whole, I suppose. What
about the other side of the coin? What about Matthew Broderick? What was your relationship to him coming to Election?
Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, me too.
Like everybody else.
There's a very noted, it's not a mistake that they cast him as Mr. McAllister here. Yeah. That this is a sort of like if shit went wrong for Ferris Bueller and he got a little too pleased with himself and he never wanted to leave high school, this is what might have happened to him. And there was some concern when they originally cast him, and the people that they looked at originally for this movie are fascinating. We'll get to that in Casting What Ifs. But he feels that much like Reese, I can't really imagine this movie with anybody else. For example, they talked about how they had to go out to Tom Hanks. The producers forced Alexander Payne to go out to Tom Hanks to do this movie. And he was like, there's no way Tom Hanks is going to do it. He's not totally right for it. But I actually can't see the movie with Tom Hanks. And I can only see it with Matthew Broderick at this point.
Yeah, in the same way, because of Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick has this kind of association of, Ferris is in a lot of ways like the likable, good-natured Tracy Flick, sort of. He's just, he runs the school and he's like pulling one on every adult in the school and in his life. He has things under control. He's got places to go. They're just not school.
Mm-hmm.
And you need that association of someone who is not just a goody-goody, I suppose.
Were you a member of student government?
I wasn't, actually.
Would it surprise you to know that I was?
No.
Yeah, I was a very active member.
What were your positions?
Vice president and secretary, I think, were the two titles that I held.
Okay. What did you do in those positions?
Just kind of jerked off my time. Okay. Like, didn't really do anything. Those things that's the thing. And that's part of the satire of the movie is these are perfunctory gigs that you get hired to do, and you basically have like 3 meetings about the prom and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm trying to remember whether we had student elections.
Hmm.
I honestly, we must have, but I could not tell you who the president of the student council was. Did we have a student council? Was my school so fascist that we didn't even have it? It seems totally possible knowing my school, but.
You want to share more about your high school experience?
Wait, it was a private, predominantly Christian school, and they were pretty strict. It was a very, very good school, but
when you say predominantly, do you mean like there were 7 people practicing Hinduism? Like what?
No, I mean, there could have been. I don't totally know,
Okay.
and I think that would have been valid. It was started as it related to like a Presbyterian school, and in the way of Southern fancy people, it was like nominally Christian, but no one really actually cared about any of the faith elements. But you had to go to assemblies twice a week, that were like sort of they were called devotionals, and sometimes they had God elements and sometimes they didn't. And then once a year, there was something called Christian Emphasis Week, which was like more Christianity than normally was in the school. But it wasn't like you had absolutely to be a Christian to go there. I'm sure you were quite uncomfortable.
Should we do Christian Emphasis Week at the Ringer?
No, we should not.
No, we
it was
shouldn't.
so weird. I mean, at some point, it was like teenagers standing up, just like evangelizing to other teenagers. I hope they don't do it anymore. But anyway, as a result of that, I think maybe like God was the student government. I'm not totally sure.
Okay. I went to public school, so we did have student government. And this school, which, the film is set in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where Alexander Payne is from, feels like a real public school to me. I think it's the whole approach to the movie is a little bit more arch than anybody's real life is going to be, but it certainly looks and feels like one because it was shot in a real one. And, I think that people in high school, both students and faculty, have a kind of pomp and circumstance around everything that they do, where they think that what they're doing is the most meaningful thing that one can do because you have to delude yourself into believing that. Now, I had actually a perfectly fine time in high school. I was like a jock and in student government, and I was what you might have imagined.
Can you define jock for us a little more?
I played baseball, basketball, and volleyball.
Okay.
And
you played volleyball?
I did.
How did I not know that about you?
Craig Horlbeck, our producer, knows that. Craig also a volleyball player.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What about the golf team?
I was on the golf team for 1 year.
Yeah.
When I gave up baseball, which was a mistake.
You were a catcher?
I was a catcher.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I don't know what that means.
That's
Maybe there's
weird.
a metaphor
Were you
in
tall
that.
to be a catcher?
I was very short until about 11th grade.
Okay.
I had a growth spurt, as one does. But I think I didn't have quite the same antagonistic relationship to high school that I think a lot of people have.
Mhm.
Maybe that's because I'm just that kind of privileged guy that things were not that
Yeah.
hard. But
Congratulations.
it's great for me. But it is interesting because I wouldn't say that I related to Paul Metzler, Chris Klein's character, but that archetype is such a funny one of the person who like the dim bulb for whom everything goes well and who has low expectations for himself and thus can get away with anything and do anything he wants to. And there are people who are constantly putting him in a position to succeed because they feel more comfortable with him. It was my wife when we were watching this movie who pointed out that there's a reason Mr. McAllister leans towards Paul because he not only sees himself in Paul, but he looks up to Paul. And, that, quarterback prom king type is such a unique thing. And I think maybe it's just my experience in public school, but it feels like a very public school kind of execution too. There's something about that I don't know, that like the whole town comes to see you play on Friday night at the big football game feeling in this movie that it assumes we understand already. Like it only mentions it in passing, but we understand who Paul is right away.
Yeah. I think they're in every school. They're certainly in my school, but just, they're the popular kids. I mean, that's what it is. And your
Sure.
definition of a popular kid may vary a bit based on geographical or socio-political expectations. It, may be a basketball player instead of a football player, or, cheerleaders may or may not be a part of the scene, which they barely are in election, actually.
It's true. And one of the things that I love about this movie that I think is true, at least to my experience, and a lot of people that I know, maybe yours as well, despite the fact that I was a jock and I was in student government, I was a fucking weirdo in high school, and I'm still a weirdo. And I think that the movie goes to great pains to show that a lot of people, even if they're in positions that you would presume are normal, are quite strange and idiosyncratic and sometimes a little bit obsessed, maybe very obsessed, which I think is also kind of a fitting metaphor for American politics. You know, the first time you see Bill Clinton speak, you might think to yourself, oh my God, what an incredible orator, what an amazing communicator and smooth, and he's got great ideas. And man, he just seems like he was born for this. And then you learn a little bit more about Bill Clinton, then a little bit more, then a little bit more. And you're like, is this guy a pervert? Like, is there something wrong with him? And you have to start thinking about it that way. And the movie does such a nice job of doing text and subtext, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Should we go into categories? What else do you want to say about high school?
I think there's a lot more to say about high school. And I guess we'll also in the categories just talk about how prescient this movie was for the political system, both in 1999 and now. You know, it became Tracy Flick. It was like the overworked Twitter joke of 2016 when Hillary Clinton was running for president.
Oh, yeah.
And we can talk about those ramifications, but it's fascinating that this movie was written in 1997 and puts its finger in so much of what came not just in 1992, but for 20 years since.
You're right. The best movies that we've talked about on this show, on the Rewatchables 1999, have had great foresight of what's to come. And this is one of those political satires that doesn't expire. It just gets more and more clairvoyant as the years go by. Let's start with the key category, I guess, of this show, which is what's the most 1999 thing about this movie? I had a little bit of a hard time putting this together because I guess no cell phones is the one that we always lean on.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there is like a lack of communication between people at all hours, you know, Mr. M constantly calling people on rotary telephones.
And the payphone.
Yeah, and the payphone. But aside from that, I mean, what stuck out to you?
The watching the VHS porn in a basement. It was like 100, and he has a whole chest full of VHS porn tapes.
It's a great note.
I mean, I was just like, this is the only thing that it has no relevance to now.
Are you saying I should get rid of all my VHS
I don't
porn?
know. They're probably worth a ton of money now.
I highly doubt that.
Quite a collection. The production was values were terrible.
Yeah. I do believe that the male porn actor in that movie is one of the producers on the film, which I thought was a good inside gag.
Very charming.
Yes, that is very 1999.
Yeah.
In the age of Pornhub, we don't need. I thought of also The Big Lebowski when I was watching this because of Logjam and in that famous VHS porn moment. But that's another thing that happened in this film that I'd completely forgotten about. That whole sequence where he goes downstairs and he pulls out this big chest, and also Mr. M's got like 30 tapes. Like that's a lot of tapes.
That's what I was thinking.
Like that's just not how it works. Like my dude was like more of a collector.
Yeah.
I think, which is a little bit unnerving.
Right.
Do you think that maybe is meant to indicate that he's got some deeper issues?
Yes, it's supposed to indicate that he's pathetic. I mean, it's just like one shot and it is just extremely pathetic. The whole thing where he's just sitting there with the Pepsi can right after she gives the speech about how Coke is the number one selling product in the world. He's supposed to be pathetic.
Yeah.
Though now it would be like, wow, what a cool vintage collection of VHS porn.
No, they would not say that.
Know.
No,
someone somewhere is just like, wow.
That's
fine.
That's not a thing.
I'm not shaming. This is a sex positive podcast, okay?
You mean like a pal of his would be like, that's so cool, your vintage collection?
I think there's like someone now in 2019 that's like what I do because I'm a hipster and is like I collect like cool niche VHS porn tapes.
Niche VHS porn guy, if you're listening, or gal for that matter, get at us. We'd like to hear all about your collection. Our producer Craig also notes that Matthew Broderick's character saying that his teaching scandal was the type of news that people posted on their bulletin boards at work is a bit outdated. That would probably be on their bulletin boards on the internet, if I had to guess. And he would be identified maybe as an unscrupulous type.
Sure. I suppose like the legal and ramifications for anyone in this movie at any point is also a very 1999 thing, and social and kind of in terms of media ramifications.
Yes. Tracy Flick's one-time paramour, Mr. Novotny, would be fucking canceled.
Right.
That guy would be out of here.
Right.
The likelihood of him just moving on to a convenience store where he's tagging and bagging, I don't think so.
Though someone does say he's lucky he didn't get arrested. Even in 1999.
They do say that.
But he just would be arrested.
What else? Do you think the fashion was terribly 1999?
It's back now. That's on my age. The best things is all of the... There is a pair of jeans that Tracy Flick wears when she's tearing down the posters that I would like to purchase.
Oh.
And if you would like to make them and brand them as Tracy Flick jeans, I mean, I'll pay too much money for them.
So I'm 37 years old. Is
Yes.
it possible that Mr. McAllister's 37?
Yes.
So I would say his style has not aged well because I would never wear the fucking clothes.
Yeah,
he's wearing in
not
the movie.
everyone is doing
Okay.
well, but in
Okay.
the 90s have come back full stop
It's true.
in terms of fashion. And so there are certain items like I don't know. Tracy Flick is doing like a limited 2 situation. Do you remember the limited 2?
I remember the limited.
Okay.
Was there an
Yeah, it was the
offshoot of the
limited,
limited?
and it was TOO.
Oh, well, wordplay.
Loved the
Love
limited
it.
too.
Okay. Was that
And-
like the cooler, more hip version of the limited?
No, it was younger. It
Oh,
was
okay.
like
Okay.
it was like Gap Kids, but it was probably more for like teenagers.
Okay.
But she's wearing like a plaid skirt that is definitely from the limited 2, and that I definitely also owned, like with the flannel tights, with the sweater. No one is actually wearing that right now, but if you did, you would look cool on the streets of Brooklyn.
So 14-year-old Amanda Dobbins, hits the mall,
Yeah.
20 minutes in Delia's,
No, it was
Burger King, and then the limited 2.
limited 2 and Bath and Body Works. And you got to give like a
What?
legit 90 minutes to the Bath and Body Works at Lenox Mall in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
There I
that's-
was.
What what does one do for more than 3 minutes in a Bath and Body Works?
Clearly, you had a sister who was a teenager. I don't understand. We spent all our time at Bath and Body Works. And then there was the whole, were you a Bath and Body Works person or were you a Body Shop person? Because Body Shop was like started in Europe, and so was
Body
maybe-
Shop sounds like a strip club.
do you not know what the Body Shop is?
I don't know what that is.
Are you an alien?
Yeah,
Have
I'm an
you
alien.
been to a mall?
I certainly have.
Okay, but you at least know what Bath and Body Works is.
I do know
Can
what
you
that
name
is.
any of the Bath and Body Works scents?
Let me see if I can guess some.
Okay.
Seafoam mist.
No, I mean
Pretty close,
it's
though?
Close. There
Okay.
probably was a seafoam one.
Okay.
But there were things like, God, I can't remember the full name of the raspberry one, but that was the most popular one. If you were really basic, you liked the raspberry guy.
Okay.
I was more of a country apple girl, which in retrospect is completely disgusting because you just smell like literally it's like a
Was
an
that was
apple.
that like neon green?
The country apple one?
Yeah.
No, there definitely were neon green ones because there was no like fidelity to the colors found in nature. It was just all different neon colors. The raspberry one was purple. Mine was like mostly like reddish. But maybe you're also thinking of the Gap scents. Do you remember that?
We're just so far down the rabbit hole right now. It's extraordinary. I've pulled you into full Tracy Flickdom.
But Bath and Body Works, I think Tracy Flick was too serious to be spending time at Bath and Body Works. She doesn't have time for that frivolous nonsense. Is she going to the mall?
Too busy conquering the world.
Yeah.
Most rewatchable scene.
Okay.
I've got a few. You tell me
Mm-hmm.
what I'm missing. This is an interesting movie to talk about this sort of a thing because it does something that I'll highlight in our next section, What's Aged the Best.
Mhm.
It is very rare. But before that, the speeches at the school assembly.
Mm-hmm.
I think is
That's-
the most iconic scene
Yes.
of the movie. Whether it's the most rewatchable, we can debate that. Mr. McAllister recounting Tracy's affair with Mr. Novotny at the beginning of the movie
Mm-hmm.
in his sort of voiceover.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a very memorable scene. It's a bit more lewd than I recalled.
Yes.
It's a fascinating way to open the movie. It really will like turn off a certain kind of a person not quite ready for this high level of like overt satire.
Yes.
Just the button punching, the button machine.
Sure.
I thought, I don't know, that was like one of the more physical acts. It reminded me of like Gendry making a weapon in Game of Thrones.
I think that's the single most iconic image from this movie. At least the number of times that like you or Chris Ryan have asked me whether I own a button machine at some point is
Do you own a button machine?
No, I don't. I really wanted to have a pick flick button for this podcast, but I didn't have enough time. And I don't own a button machine.
Send Amanda all
Yeah,
of your
please.
buttons and
or
button
cupcakes
machines.
or posters.
Don't send her cupcakes. That's,
that's
dangerous. You don't want that.
Okay.
That's how you get. I don't know. I'm not even going to say it. Tracy tears up the posters plus the interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty iconic scene in the movie.
Yeah. That's where the jeans are. They're great jeans.
Okay. This happens in between those two things, but Paul plots his affair with Linda Novotny, and then the bee sting happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's on the list. The 3 prayers before the election,
Yep.
the 3 individual prayers, and the ending, which I think is actually one of the great endings and was not the original ending.
Yeah, we have to talk about that at great length.
Which of these are you sort of most fascinated by? Do you want to break down in detail?
I think that I'm going to add my other things and then we can do the winners. Okay. So all of the intro montages
Mhm.
when it's Tracy, Tammy, and Paul introducing themselves and there's like the fun music. And I think those are in a lot of ways, that's what I remember from Election is in their voices with a lot of unreliable narration, sharing who they are. And then there's also the scene when McAllister is convincing Paul to run for president. And he's doing the apples and oranges situation.
Incredible.
And I also like bananas.
But Mr. There's
Paul, what's your favorite fruit?
pears.
Pears. Good. Okay. Let's say.
Oh,
all
no,
you ever
wait.
had was
Apples.
apples. Fine. Let's say all you ever knew were apples. Apples, apples, and more apples. You might think apples were pretty good, even if you got a rotten one once in a while. But then one day, there's an orange. And now you can make a decision. Do you want an apple, or do you want an orange? That's democracy.
I also like bananas.
Exactly. Good.
And,
One of my favorite lines of dialogue
Yeah.
in the movie.
and I think that's all I would add. I think that the campaign speeches is like the obvious.
It's got to be the winner, right?
Yeah.
Just a feat of extraordinary writing and performance.
Mhm.
There's a bit of half-assed internet research that Reese Witherspoon really wanted to play Tammy,
Mhm.
and maybe not Tracy because she loved Tammy's speech so much at the
Yeah.
assembly. And Tammy's speech is, I think challenges the Joker in The Dark Knight for all time anarchistic visions of American life. Really, it's kind of an amazing thing. Let's hear those speeches.
Who cares about this stupid election? We all know it doesn't matter who gets elected president of Carver. Do you really think it's going to change anything around here? Make one single person smarter, or happier, or nicer? The only person it does matter to is the one who gets elected. The same pathetic charade happens every year. And everyone makes the same pathetic promises just so they can put it on their transcripts to get into college. So vote for me, because I don't even want to go to college. And I don't care. And as president, I won't do anything. The only promise I will make is that if elected, I will immediately dismantle the student government so that none of us will ever have to sit through one of these stupid assemblies again.
Okay, so we agree that the speeches at the assembly are by far the most rewatchable scene. What's aged the best? I wrote down a few things.
Okay.
You'll roll your eyes at me for saying this, but I think it's important to note that the filmmaking style of this movie is very cool and very original.
I also wrote that down.
Oh, yes, Amanda. Thank God you're here. Here are a couple of the moves that Payne makes just from a purely technical perspective. He uses freeze frames, he uses wipes, he uses stock footage, he uses rear screen projection, he uses multiple music cues in the same scene, he uses different sonic cues that are not music, but just like bells dinging. He zooms and he uses a lot of insert shots.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of Alexander Payne as in the like, he's neither the David Fincher PTA master, nor is he like the mood king or queen like Sofia Coppola.
Right.
He's noted for his writing and his satire and his very keen observation of regular life. We don't think of him as a guy who's got who's slick, and who's creative artistically with the camera. But this movie, with my 37-year-old eyes, is really impressive.
It's really well made. It's also, it really evokes a certain 1999 MTV aspect, but in a nice way. I don't mean that as a dig at all, because I think it's aged really well. But like the multimedia, the music cues changing all the time, and the fact that there are like TV clips, and I really enjoy the Tracy Flick intro because she's like suddenly in Fiddler on the Roof.
Yes.
And then is also suddenly doing like a TV interview, but just all of the like the different types of media that is in the movie simultaneously. It does feel kind of like what it was like to watch MTV in 1999 in the best way.
How would you describe the MTV style that you're referring to? Because it's obvious now that the 1999 MTV of our youth, which was pretty significant, is gone. And so if you're 25 years old and listening to this podcast, you might not know what that means.
I guess, I mean, it's certainly more sophisticated. The shots are all well composed and look very nice. And he's like, there's a plot and script writing. I don't mean to diminish it, but you think a lot about, this was TRL, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's
the height.
It's someone sitting in a room telling you everything that you need to know. And suddenly you're watching one video and suddenly you're another. It's bringing a lot together of styles, of different people, of different references all at once. Is it, you know?
No,
Does
that's
that seem
right.
like a
And it's not incoherent. It's understandable.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost clear.
frenetic for sure?
But all purposeful. Also aging the best, just picking Reese Witherspoon as like a major star.
Yeah.
The woman who cast this film, I think her name is Lisa Beach. She said in an interview that there have only been 2 times in her life where a person walked into an audition room and she said, that is the most perfect person for this part that I have ever seen. And she identified Reese in Election as one of them. She did not reveal the second
Right.
one, which is just rude. I hate when people
It's
tell
a
stories like that. Like, there have only been 2 times when I've ever been happy. One of them is right now, and the other one I will not reveal. And then the thing that I think that has aged the best, and I could not think of another example of it, and maybe you can help me. This movie has a 4-person, 4-part POV voiceover approach. It bounces from character to character to character to character, and movies don't do that. Now, books do that all the time. In Election, the book has 16 characters, and each character gets their own chapter. And it comes from their perspective. And that's something obviously we know very well from Game of Thrones, for example. That was one of the kind of quote unquote fantasy innovations of that book. A single movie, I mean, voiceover is considered a sin by most filmmakers from one character.
Yeah.
Let alone multiple characters, if not done well.
I'm trying to think. I can't think of any.
I couldn't think of any. And I'm sure someone will let us know that there has been, in 1957, Nicholas Ray did yada, yada, yada. But it's kind of fascinating and it works really well. And it's never confusing. And your allegiance is simultaneously with every character and no character.
Yes. It also really does help establish the fact that none of these people are like the hero of the movie necessarily, which it is our habit. We're conditioned to watch movies a certain way, and you turn it on and you're like, okay, this person is on the screen the most, so I'm supposed to root for them.
Exactly.
And the multiplicity of voices does actually literalize the fact that there is no one person to root for.
Yeah, and the only character who doesn't have any streak of cruelty to him or her, I think, is Paul Metzler, but he's also a moron. So it's a little hard to get behind him, despite the fact that he seems like a nice guy. He's just dumb.
Yeah.
And so no one wants to root for the dumb guy.
He's dumb and also doesn't take takes no responsibility for anything. He's floating through life. Yeah.
Unpredictable Amanda criticism of Paul. Anything else for what staged the best?
Well, Tracy Flick as a concept.
Cultural icon.
Yeah. And I think, we can talk about this during Casting What Ifs or somewhere else, but I think obviously Reese Witherspoon in this role is so important because does Tracy Flick really become Tracy Flick without Reese Witherspoon? I don't know how much is on the page versus how much is in her physical embodiment. Maybe that's not the supposed question we're supposed to ask. Like that's just what actual acting looks like. But it is amazing how Tracy Flick has just become a shorthand for a type of person or a type of experience, and I think honestly can mean several different things at this point, which is fascinating when Tracy Flick takes a character takes a life of its own.
I think it's been distorted a little bit over time.
Yeah.
For good and for ill. Because Tracy Flick does a lot of unscrupulous things. And she's a climber.
Yes.
She's very motivated. And there's reasons for that because she's working in a system that doesn't respect her and doesn't want to listen to her. And that's actually one of the things I wrote down for What's Aged the Worst is sort of like just ignoring someone like Tracy. Like a character ignoring a Tracy Flick is a big mistake in 2019. You can't do that.
No.
But I do think that as many good qualities and as much intelligence as she has, she does tear down the poster in a moment of uncontrolled rage.
Of
and
course.
that leads to some nasty actions. And then when she's confronted about it, she lies. And then when someone else takes responsibility for it, she blames them.
Yes.
And it's not so cut and dry. And I think some people will say, oh, I'm a Tracy Flick. I'm like Hillary Clinton. I'm doing my best, but I'm working in a system that doesn't respect me. And it's like, in some respects, that's true.
Right.
And in some respects, you don't want to be strictly identified as such,
Yeah. Well, I think that's always been, there is the Tracy Flick as other people receive her, and there is the Tracy Flick as she is herself.
Yeah.
And it can mean either thing, and I think it's useful either way. I agree with you that she's not she shouldn't be a heroine. I honestly, I know Hillary Clinton kind of aligned herself with it in 2016, or there's an anecdote where apparently when she met Reese Witherspoon, she kind of said, people talk to me about Tracy Flick all the time, which is different than aligning yourself. And that's not a compliment to Hillary Clinton. I think headline writers simplified it in 2016, which headline writers simplified a lot of things in 2016, and we can just all have to move past it. But I think that the real comparison is as much for Hillary Clinton's ambition and for some of the things that she has done that were not the best.
They were not the best. The thing that Hillary has been very vocal about in terms of her approach to her work is she works hard. And Tracy is a similar person who talks about how hard she works. In some cases, you have to identify that so that people respect you. In other cases, it will be held against you.
Yeah.
Anything else for what's aged the best?
Well, I already talked about the wardrobe. So it's great.
I also wrote down, I didn't write this down, but I just want to give a shout out to the music, which is just so good in this movie and is not what you would expect. Certainly not from a teen comedy, but not even really from an Alexander Payne movie. The score from Navajo Joe plays a pretty significant part in this role. And every time Tracy's rage starts to bubble to the surface, we hear that sonorous, almost like, it's meant to be like a Native American howl of some kind. And it feels like her brain is going to explode. And there's a couple funny things about that. One, just a great example of using music from another source for your movie and contrasting it with the kind of movie. Navajo Joe is, of course, like a spaghetti Western starring Burt Reynolds from the mid-'60s about a Native American fighter. The Leonardo DiCaprio character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is loosely based on the experience that Burt Reynolds had when he made Navajo Joe. So there's just a little bit of relevant 2019 stuff going on there. But in general, all the music is this great combination of like juxtaposition. Anytime there's a bubbly song, you have a dark scene. Every time you have a dark set of music, it's thought to be a love scene or love sequence.
Right.
Just very clever filmmaking going on.
I agree.
What's aged the worst? I mentioned ignoring women like Tracy Flick at your own peril. I think that there is, while I thought the ending is wonderful, there is an acidity at the end of the movie that I think is tricky to unpack, which is Tracy a Monica Lewinsky based on the ending of the movie?
Oh, I see.
There's no one says anything definitively.
Right, but she gets in the car and
Yeah.
it's supposed to be.
Got a Nebraska senator.
Yeah.
She's obviously working on the Hill after graduating from Georgetown.
Yeah.
Or interning maybe.
Right. I mean, this is the larger question, which makes this movie really interesting. But, to what extent is Tracy an anti-hero? To what extent is she a villain? And to what extent is she a victim?
Right.
Because there is the character fleshing out that they do for her is obviously the affair with the teacher. But also, they kind of drop in that she has a mother who is living out all of her dreams through her daughter, there's a lot there that they just kind of drop in and let you go. And they also, I believe they cut some of this out. This is half-assed internet research, but there is some class stuff as well that is kind of floating even as in the voiceover after the button punching, when Chris Klein is standing on the top of his pickup truck, and he's shot like a god, and then she's like glaring at him from the school bus. You get a sense of that very classic high school dynamic of like the rich kids or the popular kids, just because they have stuff.
Yeah, and they show us the Metzler home, which has these two giant pillars out front and is this big brick Tudor. And while we don't see the exterior of Tracy's house, one assumes she lives in a one-story ranch or maybe an apartment with her mom, and her dad is not in her life, and there are obviously a lot of things that make her life a little bit more challenging and tricky. The thing with the ending is like Mr. McAllister is a villain, like particularly the way that they position him at the end of the movie. He's a bad guy, and even as we we hear him explain what happened to his life after he left Omaha,
right,
we know that things are not as rosy as he is portraying them because we can see them. We can see his tiny apartment. We can see the awkwardness between him and his new girlfriend. We can see the rage that's still inside him when he gets a look at Tracy.
And we see the last shot, which is the tiny next generation Tracy like coming for him.
Exactly. Shooting her hand up to answer his question, and
Right.
he is desperate to ignore her.
Yes.
The other thing that I think hasn't aged well is just the Fellini homage, where after Mr. McAllister has sex with Mrs. Novotny,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's driving back to work,
Oh,
and all of a sudden he's in an Aston Martin, and he looks like, Marcello Mastroianni.
Right.
He's wearing the sunglasses, and it felt like the movie quickly turned into Austin Powers for a second. It was like a flourish that didn't seem totally right
too much.
in the movie. I
Yeah.
don't, that didn't bother you?
I mean, at least it's signaling that he's a joke, and the movie thinks of him as a joke, and also thinks of what he did. It does an effective job of signaling like the point of view and the morals of or the lack of morals of the movie, as the case may be.
Has anything else aged poorly for you?
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to throw a bomb in the middle of this podcast.
Here we go.
Like Matthew Broderick's character being a major part of this movie.
Wow.
I know. Okay. And as I said, when I was rewatching, I kind of realized that the idea of Tracy Flick possibly came to me before this movie. And I do also, it's personal bias that I think of this as the Tracy Flick movie. But I had forgotten just how much stuff there is about his personal life, which
Mhm.
I don't really care. And I don't know what it's revealing about anything that the movie is about, except that this sad guy who is supposed to be, he's the narrator, for lack of a better word. He's your way into the world of this high school election. And he is also elevating the stakes and taking it from just a teen comedy to something with adults in it.
Mm-hmm.
But and you don't want, you have to make that narrator interesting, or else it's just a plot device.
Do you want my pitch for it?
Yeah.
So obviously the movie opens with this dialectic about morals and ethics. And that's kind of the gag of the movie, is what is the difference between the two? Can you differentiate them? Can you define how one applies to your life and one applies to your mind? And Mr. McAllister is not just a tool to let you have those conversations, but he's a living embodiment of the differentiation between those two things. So if we don't know that Mr. McAllister is ultimately a selfish, callow person, which we see when he cheats on his wife with whom he's trying to have a child, then we don't really realize what's motivating him to be fighting back against Tracy. We don't totally understand why he's so insecure, why he's threatened, why he is always telling us how great his life is, how he always wanted to be a teacher, and what he wants to do is make a difference in people's lives. There's that really great moment when we get his intro, and Broderick's character is saying how he feels really lucky to have been such a significant influence on young people. And there's a young woman who's crying to him, and he puts his hand on her shoulder.
Right.
And maybe this is a 2019 gloss on things, but I was like, don't touch her. What are you doing?
Sure.
And he doesn't really know his place in the world. And he makes that crack to Mrs. Novotny before they eventually have an affair about should we get a room? And it's the most inappropriate, out of touch, weird joke. And maybe he's identified something under the surface about an attraction that they have to each other, but it's so off the reservation. He so clearly doesn't get the way to be in the world, even though it's his job to tell young people how to be in the world. So by showing him in his personal life fucking up all the time, we realize that he's a monster.
No, I think that's true. And to the extent that you need to portray that he's a monster in order for it to make sense that he's facing off against Tracy Flick and why he ultimately takes away the two ballots, I understand all of that. It's just, also, by the way, I didn't read that should we get a room joke as a joke.
So what do you think? Should we get a room?
Should we get a what?
Maybe it wasn't
Yeah.
a joke. It was the kind of thing that was said, and it could have been received either way. It could have been received as, yes, let's get a room, and he would have been excited, or it could have been received as oh, you're so bad, Mr. McAllister, whatever his first name is. But the way that she received it, which is with that sour look and that disappointment, is the worst possible way it could have been received.
Yeah.
But he's just so inept. That's what they're trying to show
and
us.
that's very clear. I think I just am kind of maybe this movie doesn't need an inept sad guy as the foil for Tracy Flick. And the speed with which she ultimately dispenses of him. As you said, one of the things that adds age well is underestimating people like Tracy Flick. And it's just that battle is not the most interesting thing to me in this movie between those two people. I think anytime the three, whether it's Paul, Tammy, or Tracy Flick, are on screen, that is the exciting, that is the electric part of the filmmaking. All of the high school stuff and the way that they all react to each other is what I remember. So, I mean, I'm not saying like you should have made a different movie. That's shitty criticism. But in terms of what's aged the worst, I just don't think of the McAllister character when I think of this movie at all.
It's a really interesting point. I think that there is probably some just general bias in the fact that the movie is written by two middle-aged white guys, that the novel was written by a middle-aged white guy, that the movie is directed by a middle-aged white guy, that the two producers were middle-aged white guys, that the two executives who worked at Paramount were two white guys. I think that there is a little bit of a, the same way that Mr. McAllister sees something in Paul that he can't get away from, they probably see something, even if it's self-lacerating in themselves, that they can't get away from with Mr. McAllister and making him a bigger part. Now, at the time, I don't think you could have made this movie without a Matthew Broderick.
Of course.
And that also is a kind of commentary unto itself.
Yeah.
So you've made an interesting point. I mean, if it were 2019, I don't know who is the modern day equivalent of Reese Witherspoon. I'm not even sure who we would have cast in this role. Who's a 21-year-old actress who connotes a great deal of fame and complexity.
Well, I don't know about fame at this point, but you could see the first person who popped in my head was that I could see Saoirse Ronan doing a version of Tracy Flick.
Right. And if you had Saoirse Ronan, who is like a 3-time Academy Award nominee, maybe you don't have to have a Mr. McAllister.
Probably not. But if you make it in 2019, you make it for Netflix and it just, it stars Saoirse or someone else.
You're stepping on a category on this show.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I forgot about that one. I forgot we added it.
Casting what ifs.
Okay.
Speaking of what if we did something different with the casting, I mentioned the Tom Hanks thing. Paramount instructed Alexander Payne to go to Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, and Brad Pitt first for Mr. McAllister.
Let me tell you something. If Brad Pitt were Mr. McAllister in this movie, I would be all about the Mr. McAllister character.
That would have been a bit strange. I think it would have been a little hard to believe.
But you know what? I would remember it.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I'm interested.
Brad Pitt,
those are two worthy adversaries.
I mean, Brad
Show
Pitt
me that.
at this time is Tyler Durden. I mean, there's just no way you can put Brad Pitt in this. But you can't put him in this movie.
If we're going to do toxic masculinity, let's do some toxic masculinity with some handsomeness.
It's a fair point, but he would have had to put on like 30 pounds, get a bad haircut.
Maybe not.
Maybe some lousy ties. I don't know. I just don't see it. Brad Pitt's never played
Maybe
ugly.
He doesn't have to play it like a total loser. Maybe he can play it more like a bad person, which frankly would be more of an equal adversary for my girl Tracy Flick.
Reese Witherspoon, as I mentioned, originally wanted to play Tammy Metzler. Do you know who originally was cast as Tammy? Did you read about this?
I didn't read about this.
So Thora Birch.
Oh, yes, I did.
Thora Birch, who once upon a time was a big actress in Hollywood, and in fact in 1999 appeared in the movie American Beauty, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, was Tammy. And Thora Birch was the star of movies like Now and Then and a lot of other teen dramas. And I think 2 weeks before filming began, Alexander Payne decided that she wasn't good for the part and he let her go. And then, I guess out of the blue, they found Jessica Campbell, who is another person who I'm like, I actually can't imagine another person doing this part.
Yeah.
And Jessica Campbell has not really gone on to do a lot in Hollywood. She's no longer in the business. She's got braces. She has a very just plainly kind of Midwestern high school kid look. She's in that awkward phase where she's not quite an adult and she has a kind of like, I don't know, how would you describe her affectations?
She's unaware of the discomfort that she's causing anybody else. She's kind of unaware of like that teenage, I don't know what my body's doing. I don't really understand how to interact with people. That's the character that she's playing because Jessica Campbell knows how to pop out from behind a trash can like nobody I've ever seen. I mean, that whole montage of them just zooming in on her staring through random windows is iconic.
It's great stuff. She's wonderful in the movie. I'm nothing against Thora Birch, but Thora Birch, this is going to seem harsh, but I think it was just too attractive in a way. Thora Birch was a beautiful young actress, and I don't know about like a babe exactly, but
she was also so successful that even if you recognize her and she's like you associate her with doing successful things, and you think, oh, you're pretending to be someone you're not. That's great acting.
Yeah, that's true. And we bring baggage to the table with her. And maybe you bring a little baggage with Reese, but probably not very much. And the baggage you bring with Matthew Broderick is helpful. Knowing it's Ferris Bueller, I think, is a smart commentary. And both she and Chris Klein we'd never seen before. And Chris Klein actually attended the high school that this movie is shot in.
It's an all-time incredible find.
Absolutely amazing, because how can somebody be so absent of irony, so absent of self-awareness? And if, as we follow Chris Klein's career, and he also appears in American Pie in 1999, and he goes on to have a significant movie career, he never develops that sense of irony. He never is self-aware in any character he plays. And I think we've kind of come to realize that he's got one pitch as an actor, but for this part, he's so perfect. And so you get the impression that he actually is the jock in real life.
Yes. It's like they found someone and managed to bottle it, and just he's really wonderful in this movie.
So funny. Everything he says is him reading the speech off the piece of paper in the same monotone speed is just so good.
Also him trying to understand simplified democracy. Is everyone. It's really, really good.
Yeah, so my wife also pointed out when we were rewatching it last night that there's something very beautiful in that scene that you mentioned earlier about the fact that he draws apples and he draws oranges, but they look exactly the same, which is what Republicans and Democrats are. They're exactly the same ultimately when you boil it down to shapes. Tim Robbins was also an early contender for the role of Jim McAllister.
I read that.
Would that have worked?
It'd be creepier, but is that?
Would it?
Yeah, with all respect to Matthew Broderick, who is a fine actor, and Ferris Bueller is really important. He's a zero in this movie, and he's supposed to be. That is the way it's written, and
he's a beta.
Yeah, but I'm looking for. I would like to see who Tracy Flick has to encounter next. Because this just really feels like a JV squabble for her.
Interesting. Are you pitching a sequel right now?
I mean, I'm just saying. I would like to know.
I guess Tracy Flick, if she's 17 in 1999, is probably running for Congress in Nebraska in 2019.
You don't think she's already run at this point?
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
It's possible. In which case, maybe she's running for Senate.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
But probably not president yet.
So she definitely, if she's 17 and a Republican in 1999, so then at some point she's working for the W. Bush administration, right?
You think she's going Republican for sure?
She is Republican at the end. They say that's a Republican senator that she gets in the car with.
But that doesn't mean she's a Republican.
Well.
Never can tell.
I guess that's true.
The Dion Waiters Award for the Biggest Heat Check. I wrote down a few names. Phil Reeves as Principal Walt Hendricks. Also a huge that guy, but just really, really funny. Frankie Ingracia as Lisa Flanagan. We haven't talked about Lisa at all. I enjoyed her.
She does a lot with a little, which is the definition of this award. She's pretty funny.
She's also such a great stand-in for the hyper ambitious wife of the candidate. I love the way that she is so meticulous about the posters and how much money is being spent. And there's a little bit of Elizabeth Dole in her, I think.
Yes, there is.
Nicholas D'Agosto as Larry Fauch.
The ballot counter.
Yes.
He's so great.
Amazing.
Also, his sidekick.
Oh, he's great too.
Is tremendous. I have the ballot counter kids written down.
Do you know the story about the ballot counter kid's sidekick on the set of this movie? I think both of these kids also went to the high school like Chris Klein.
I assumed.
And Nicholas D'Agosto went on to a Hollywood career. He's actually quite a good actor, and he's quite good in this movie. His partner, who indicates to Tracy when she comes by the window while they're counting, he gives her the thumbs up. That guy in real life apparently asked Reese Witherspoon out on a date when they were making the movie, and she went out and got a cup of coffee with him.
That's very cute.
And he said it was the highlight of his life.
Good for him.
Poor kid. Any other Dion Waiters Award winners?
So I guess Jessica Campbell is not eligible for this.
I think her part's a little too big, right?
She's the real revelation to me on rewatch.
I think if you're a POV character, you can't quite win this award, but I agree with you that she's great.
All right. Okay.
Half-assed internet. Oh, well, who would you choose?
Then I choose the ballot counter kids.
Yeah, he's great. that would have been my choice too. Love that kid. Can we hear a little bit of him?
What have you got?
Well, I'm not supposed to tell. Not until you've counted 2. We're each supposed to make an independent count.
You're kidding, right?
Well, I thought those were the rules, Mr. McAllister. If they've changed any way, I can...
Larry, we're not electing the fucking Pope here. Just tell me who won.
It's a squeaker, Mr. M. I've got Tracy by a vote. Just one vote.
Half-assed internet research. I mentioned all the backstory about Parada's novel. You know, the first inspiration obviously was the 92 election. The second was a 1992 incident at Memorial High School in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in which a pregnant student was elected homecoming queen, but the staff announced a different winner and burned the ballots to cover it up. It's fucked up. The source novel by Tom Parada is a reworking of one of my favorite books of all time, Bud Schulberg's 1941 novel, What Makes Sammy Run? In Schulberg's novel, have you read this book?
I haven't.
Okay. In Schulberg's novel, an older writer watches young Sammy Glick rise through the ranks of New York City journalism and the old Hollywood studio system. In this movie, Al Mannheim is replaced by Jim McAllister and Sammy Glick by Tracy Flick. Great tidbit. The film's original ending was not known until a rough work print of it was found in a box of VHS tapes at a yard sale in 2011. In the alternate ending, Jim stays in Omaha and becomes a used car salesman instead of moving to New York. Tracy encounters Jim while looking to buy a car, and the two settle their differences before she has him sign her yearbook.
Yeah, we have to talk about this at length. Did you watch it? It's on YouTube.
I haven't seen it.
It's really jarring. You know, and it's also, is it real? There's one YouTube clip, and it's someone with a camera filming the TV itself.
I mean, it must be real though, right?
I mean, it is real because it's Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon, but there seems to be some context missing.
Okay.
But it is so tonally different, which is evident in the plot description, but they're just like being really nice to each other, and it is just a happy ending. And it's not even arch in its happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I at some point I feel like a fraud commenting on quality because once you watch this on tone, because once you watch the quality of this video, it's just like I'm, looking at like the little like black and white things. It's not well preserved, but it's really bewildering. And the fact that this was the original ending starts making me question a lot of my interpretation of the movie.
How so?
Well, I just think I hate being like we have to talk about the filmmaker's intention in a movie. And I think for the most part, that's totally the wrong way to do criticism. But an ending that's so different and signals such a different resolution and a different understanding of who the characters are and where they would end up makes me think that I misunderstand the characters. Or that maybe the movie has a different idea of whether Tracy Flick is a hero or a villain and whether McAllister is redeemable or all of those things.
I don't know if we can really know the answer to that because from what I understand, the studio and test screen audiences hated the ending.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Jim Taylor and Payne went back and wrote a new ending. And I don't know what the ending is in the book. I don't think it's the ending that they had originally in the movie. And I know it's not the ending that they landed on, which is quite a clever, almost like a coda,
Yes.
The way the movie ends is sort of like, where are they now kind of feeling. But it works so well. And it does what you're describing, which is that it lets us see that there is a darkness in Tracy, even as she's going up in the world. And it shows us that there's still this kind of weak vanity and sadness and pathetic quality to Mr. M. And that is the kind of movie it is. It's really true to the movie you've just watched, and it feels like they earned their bad endings. Whereas this one that I'm reading about just doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, the characters wind up like making peace, which is also messes up any resolution that or like any understanding that you have of what this movie has to say about the political system or ambition or like how people like this relate to each other. It's pretty confusing. And I don't understand because I think the rest of the movie is so totally consistent.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that they landed where they did.
Me too.
You mentioned Hillary Clinton a couple of times here.
Mm-hmm.
We should also note that Barack Obama has on 2 occasions told Alexander Payne that this is his favorite political movie of all time.
That sounds great. It does seem like Barack Obama goes around talking to filmmakers and novel writers and is just like, oh man, I loved this. And actors like, I feel like I know so much about what Barack Obama thinks about political movies. And in my understanding, he likes them all.
Barack Obama, come on the Rewatchables. You coward. Come share your takes with us. Why are you just telling them in private to filmmakers of great import? Since the movie was shot in a real high school, Papillon La Vista Senior High School in Omaha, Nebraska. How can there be a high school called Papillon La Vista in Omaha? That's fascinating to me. Adjacent classrooms had real classes going on while some scenes for the movie were being shot. In the soundtrack, some background noises come from real teachers and students. Director Alexander Payne decided to leave that in to give the movie a more realistic sound. Several members of the student body and the faculty appeared in the movie, which I mentioned, including Chris Klein and including the ballot counters, but also including the janitor, who plays a significant part in this movie, who, of course, we see at the beginning when Mr. McAllister puts the Chinese food on the ground, and then later when he recovers the crumpled ballots, that was the Papillon La Vista janitor.
Great performance.
His face making, his mugging is tremendous.
It's very clear motivation with very limited screen time.
Absolutely. Here's a weird one. Each of the 3 candidates have a fake Tiffany lamp on their bedside tables.
I saw that. I don't know what that's about.
Me neither. One of the porno videos in Jim McAllister's collection is called The Big Election.
Okay.
Shouldn't it be The Big Erection? Okay. Apples are featured prominently in this movie, usually before trouble arrives for a character. I love shit like this.
Yeah.
They are used as an analogy to entice Paul Metzler to enter the election. An apple tree is shown before Mr. McAllister is stung by a bee. Apples hang above the doorway to Mr. McAllister's living room right before he discovers his wife knows he cheated on her, and Mr. McAllister wins the Apple Teacher of the Year award at the beginning of the movie.
That's true. Can I just say, it's not just one apple tree when he gets stung by a bee. There are like 5, and I've never seen an apple tree that robust.
Do apples grow on trees in Nebraska? Is that the sort of tree you can have in your backyard?
Well, apples do grow on trees.
Well, I know that.
And you remember apple picking in New York was a thing that people would do
Of course.
So I think anywhere where
But in an orchard, not in someone's backyard.
Sure, but with our fruit trees in people's backyards all across Los Angeles, I think you can have like a fruit tree.
Yeah, but Los Angeles is a highly temperate weather climate.
But I think they grow a lot of things in Nebraska, and I think apples also require a greater temperature swing, as evidenced by them being in New York and Vermont. So perhaps it is also possible in Nebraska. I confess I am not an expert on the weather in Nebraska, but it seems plausible to me. More plausible than like 5 apple trees with like all of like their perfect glistening apples on the trees simultaneously.
I like it as a filmmaking cue. I'm not sure
Okay.
Scientifically if it really makes sense. When Tracy wonders what Dave Novotny is up to since being fired, he is seen working at the same store that Kurtwood Smith worked at in Citizen Ruth, Alexander Payne's first film. He is also putting price stickers on the same cans of patio sealant that Ruth huffed right before getting arrested in Citizen Ruth.
That's nice.
I like Alexander Payne creating his own little expanded universe.
That is nice. I also read that if you freeze frame one of the newspaper articles shown in this, that it says, "Why are you reading this headline? You could be watching Citizen Ruth."
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's great shit. Apex Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll preface this by saying I don't think anybody is at their apex.
I have one person, but okay.
Reese, I think it has to be either right after Legally Blonde or right after Walk the Line.
Yeah.
And maybe even after Big Little Lies season 1, because then she gets this whole other engine going.
Yes.
But that's 3 candidates ahead of this. Now, I think there's a case to be made that this is her best performance.
I would agree with that.
But not Apex Mountain.
I think it's just also like we confuse the definition of Apex Mountain. It's in many ways the turning point for Reese Witherspoon. It's like the single most significant moment in her career.
No, it's the moment when she has the most juice.
No, I know what Apex moment is. I understand. Okay. I've been on this podcast before.
God damn it. Will there ever be confusion around Apex Mountain?
But I'm just saying that it's not her Apex Mountain, but it is maybe the most significant moment of her career.
Agree with that.
Okay.
Apex Mountain, Alexander Payne. I think it has to be Sideways, right?
Yes.
Who's your suggestion?
Chris Klein.
Oh.
I mean,
you're right. You're right.
What's better than this, really, for him?
Can we do a quick rundown his IMDb?
Sure.
You're absolutely right with that suggestion. There wasn't a feeling like Hollywood got another one when he came along. And then in 1999, like I mentioned earlier, he appears in American Pie, and then a movie called Here on Earth that I don't recall, which does not look very good. Chris Klein, Lily Sobieski, and Josh Hartnett. Wow. You love to see it.
Wow.
The kings and queens of 2000. And then he appears in Say It Isn't So, which was a derided screwball comedy. American Pie 2. Rollerball. Remember Rollerball?
I don't.
We Were Soldiers.
Oh, boy.
The United States of Leland. Just Friends?
Yeah. Ugh.
The Long Weekend? American Dreams? This is tough sledding for
That's
my guy,
really,
Chris
really
Klein.
tough.
He apparently this year is appearing in a movie called Benchwarmers 2.
Wow, that says it all.
It's really not what you want. Feel bad for this guy. I guess he's on The Flash now, the TV show,
Okay.
which seems like a good gig.
Yeah.
But he did really not turn out to be our Tom Cruise.
No.
Fascinating stuff. Next category, Joey Pants Award. I already mentioned Phil Reeves as Principal Walt Hendricks. Love that guy. Molly Hagan as Diane McAllister. I couldn't place her, but Mr. McAllister's wife had such a memorable face to me.
I agree. I also Googled her and then I was like, I must be confusing her with someone else because it was not in any of the movies listed on her IMDb page. And then I was never really able to place who she looks like.
Was she on a TV show? Oh, I know what she was in. I know exactly what she was in.
What was she in?
She was in the Fox series Herman's Head.
Okay.
Did you ever see Herman's Head?
No, I
Might be a little
didn't.
before your time.
That's not how I know her.
Which was, I believe, on the same night as Married with Children and The Simpsons.
Oh, I see.
Colleen Camp as Judith Flick. You know Colleen Camp?
No, do I?
She is Yvette from Clue.
Clue. There we go. Your Clue obsession.
My Clue obsession comes to fruition here, and she's been in a comic actress in a lot of different movies. I also wrote down Matt Malloy as Vice Principal Ron Ball, who's been in a billion movies but doesn't really have a whole heck of a lot to do here. My vote goes to Phil Reeves.
Yes.
Okay. Saul Rubinek Award for overacting.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's only one person, and the overacting is effective, and that's Mark Haralick as Dave Novotny.
Yeah. You need it or else it's really grim.
So I saw a documentary about the making of this movie, and Mark Haralick is featured prominently in the documentary. It was for True TV. It was behind the scenes of the movie. All the major players are interviewed. Alexander Payne is interviewed. Chris Klein is interviewed. Everybody. Reese is the only person who doesn't talk, but she has talked many times about this film. Mark Haralick plays a big part, and he says that all of his friends now call him Novotny, and that is his the thing he is best known for, which is really a tough beat.
That is.
This guy is a pederast. It's not what you want.
Yeah. No, it's not good.
Picking nits. Would Mr. McAllister really leave the 2 crumpled ballots in the garbage can?
I agree with that.
What the fuck?
No, I know. But it's all one of my picking nits. It's just all of the election systems in this movie are just completely unbelievable, except that it was literally 1 year before the Hanging Chads. I know. I agree with you.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. It's really frustrating.
They presaged that exact thing 1 year
No,
later. It's unbelievable.
I know. I would also just point out that the signature system just seems very vulnerable to forgery,
Oh,
and
no
no one
question.
is checking any of those names. But
No question.
Yeah, I agree with you, but also it turned out to be true, so we're fucked.
God, that's really depressing. Any other nits to pick?
Yeah. Again, I don't mean to bring the existential ones, but let's just talk about it.
Okay.
I don't know. This is a question, but I think it probably is picking it. Who are the people that are voting for Tracy Flick in this universe? And how is she getting half the votes?
I'll reveal a little personal history to
great.
clarify some of
Okay.
this. So, did you have superlatives at your school?
Yes, I think we did, but they were kind of they were controlled because I think even at my school, everyone understood that it was a mechanism for cruelty.
Oh.
You know?
Did you win a superlative of any kind?
No, I don't think
Most
so. 'Cause-
Tracy Flick?
No, because no one at my school knew who Tracy Flick was
Okay.
because I was
Sorry.
I was not given the gift of independent film or interesting art until I went to college. That's okay. Here I am still. But it was most helpful or whatever bullshit like
Most
that.
helpful?
I don't know.
What
I
kind
went
of
to
a
a
fucking
lame-ass
weird school did you go to?
I told you
Most
we had
helpful?
it was not that, but it was pretty close. We had a week called Christian Emphasis Week. What do you want from
Okay.
me? I survived.
So a very lighthearted and warm superlative at my school was friendliest. And
Oh, I'm sorry. Friendliest is
Well,
fine, but most helpful is unheard of.
I would say the friendliest was probably the least pointed. A lot of times it's class clown, most likely to succeed, best looking, kind of obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Friendliest was one of the blandest of all of them. And the winner of friendliest was me. And
that's insane.
I'm making a point here. I, of course, am not the friendliest person you'll ever meet. I'm not unfriendly, but I would never describe myself as friendly. But for whatever reason, people were convinced that I was a nice guy. And I think it belies the fact that people don't know you at all in high school.
No, I think
and they
that's
did not know Tracy Flick at all.
So let's tease this out a little, okay? Because if you're voting for friendliest, but it's
I think
like
I just knew the most
right,
people.
That's what it is. It's like you said hello and did the thing that you do when you go to restaurants and like start bantering with a waiter, which is like a server. I'm sorry. And that's what you always do. You try to start up a conversation. Yeah. But you did the kind of like fake hello. We're going to have some small talk with enough people.
I'm sociable.
Sort of. You are sociable, but it's also like sociable with a point, you know? And
what's the point?
With an agenda.
What is it?
Right. I don't know, to like whatever.
This is exactly my point. No one knows
exactly,
what my agenda
and that's
is.
why people are voting for you for friendliest, but they don't actually think you're friendly. They just think that they know you. But it does seem okay.
This is exactly why Tracy Flick got elected. Because people think that they know who she is, but they don't realize what's churning beneath the surface.
But it kind of seems like they know a little bit. Because
Larry Fouch seemed very excited that she won. He thought that was just and true.
Well, he knows how to I guess that's true. I don't know. It just seems like I think about the prayer and Tammy is like, I would like Paul to win instead of that cunt Tracy Flick. And like obviously Tammy is the one we all root for, and she's the only person that, quote, has her priorities in line, though we should talk about that.
Yep.
But it does seem like there is some knowledge about who Tracy is. She's the goody-goody. And if we receive this movie as a commentary on the girl who tries too hard and the suck up, the hand raising, that person that you all know, everybody knows a Tracy Flick, and everyone is also to an extent a Tracy Flick. But if we understand that this movie is the movie that put their finger on those types of people aren't well received and people don't want to root for them, then, which it does, I think, then how are there still literally half the school that is voting for them? That's all. That's all I'm asking.
It's unanswerable, I think.
Okay.
Any other nits?
No, I think that's it.
Best quote. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
We've already heard the speech. I think the opening line of Tammy's speech, who cares about this stupid election, is incredible and just explains her character perfectly in 5 seconds. Jim McAllister, Larry, we're not electing the fucking Pope here. Just tell me who won. Tammy Metzler, if you died right now, I would throw myself into one of my dad's cement trucks and get poured into your tomb. Which is, of course, a love note that she writes to Lisa, who does not respond in kind.
Really love Tammy.
One of my very favorite moments of the movie, and it is so funny, and I don't know if Chris Klein knew how funny it was at the time, is when he's driving in his truck, and it's immediately after he's decided to run, and he says,
Paul Power. Paul for president. Paul for president. Promise. Progress. Peanut.
And then it just cuts away from him after he says peanut. Wonderful shit. A lot of these quotes are long in our voiceover.
Yeah.
But, there's a particularly one from Tracy where she says, you might think it upset me that Paul Metzler had decided to run against me, but nothing could be further from the truth. He was no competition for me. It was like apples and oranges. I had to work a little harder, that's all. You see, I believe in the voters. They understand that elections aren't just popularity contests. They know this country was built by people just like me who work very hard and don't have everything handed to them on a silver spoon. Not like some rich kids who everybody likes because their fathers own Metzler Cement and give them trucks on their 16th birthday and throw them big parties all the time. No, they don't ever have to work for anything. They think they can just all of a sudden, one day out of the blue, waltz right in with no qualifications whatsoever and try to take away what other people have worked for very, very hard for their entire lives. No, didn't bother me at all.
I mean, that's the one for me.
That's the iconic speech.
Yeah. I mean, that's also when the buttons are being punched.
Buttons are being punched and she's gazing outside the bus towards the truck, which is, anybody with class anxiety, I think, can really relate to that. Good morning, Mr. M. Looks like you could use a cupcake. That's a big one. Gosh, there's so many long Tracy Flick speeches in this movie, most of which I think fall into this category. The one other one I wanted to cite is a Tammy moment. And it's early on when we meet Tammy, and she's narrating, and we see her sitting in a field, and she says,
"Sometimes when I'm sad, I sit and watch the power station. They say if you lie between two of the main wires, your body just evaporates. You become a gas. I wonder what that would feel like."
I thought that was a great evocation of the dumb shit you think of when you're a teenager, when you're in this like existential despair, but also you're a buffoon. You know, you just don't know anything about anything. So you're like, wouldn't it be great if I was just dead? And then what would everybody think?
Yeah.
No one would know how to feel about anything. And then you stop for 5 seconds and you're like, that's not actually how I feel about anything in the world. Any other best quotes?
No, I think all of the Tracy narrations are just kind of together as one, because it's just, you can hear her voice. One thing that's really amazing about this performance, and I hadn't really thought about it till just now, is that there is both the voice performance, which stands on its own because of these narrations, and then also just like the really physical nature of what Reese Witherspoon does with Tracy Flick, which are totally separate. And that's very hard to do, to like completely develop all the different aspects of it so they can work individually, but they do.
2 great notes about that I learned as I was researching the movie. One, apparently Payne uses animal metaphors to inspire his actors frequently. So he would commonly say, in this scene, you're like a panther to Reese Witherspoon. And then the way she would move, or in the scene when after she learns that she's won after looking in the window, he says, in this scene, you're a human pogo stick. And that's why she bounces around the way that she does. And then the other thing that she said was that because she's clenching her jaw and flaring her nostrils so frequently in this movie, which is a note that she got from the director, she said she developed TMJ and was literally prescribed medication to get over TMJ, which is kind of amazing and gives you a sense of her performance. I also like Bananas, the closing moment from the Apples and Oranges speech. Any vote for, is there officially a best quote?
The button speech that you delivered in full, which
very,
we now
very
have on
hard.
tape. Yeah, and we'll use against you.
That's fine. Could this work as a 10-episode Netflix show in 2019?
Yes. Also, weirdly, they're trying to remake it, basically. Well, not trying to remake it, but they're doing something that sounds a lot like
The Politician?
Yes.
Yeah.
But from
I
Ryan
wrote
Murphy.
that down here.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder how that will play in 2019.
You know, I know very little about it except that Gwyneth Paltrow is in it and also knows that she's in it. So we'll see. But it does have a similar. Well,
I think it's because it's produced by her husband.
Yes.
Yeah,
and he asked her to do it. But it does involve, I believe, Ben Platt is playing a young, ambitious politician.
Yes, exactly. Who starts at a very young age.
Yes.
Yeah. Unanswerable questions.
Mm-hmm.
If she could have run, would Tammy have won the election?
Well, yes, probably. This is what we should talk about, because what is the ultimate endorsement of this movie? Because she is the heroine, and she is basically like political apathy, which is I think certainly resonated at the time, and I'm sure in some ways resonates now.
I don't know if it does. I wonder if it does.
Yeah,
it's an interesting question. That might also be. Could Tammy be a significantly impressive figure
right
now? Because Ross Perot was a maverick third-party candidate, but he did care about certain things.
Yeah,
and Tammy is saying she doesn't care about anything.
Right.
And I think you certainly couldn't run in 2020 as the president of the United States by saying, I don't care about anything. And as we just saw with Howard Schultz, running as a third-party candidate is a bit perilous. So we'll see. Is Tracy Flick simply annoying, or is she a villain?
That's one of the questions I have written down.
There's no way to know.
I think the movie is ultimately undecided on that, which is what makes it interesting and what makes her an interesting character. It makes it work.
Does Tracy Flick become the president?
I really, as I said, I thought the Hillary Clinton stuff was super belabored, but no, we have the answer.
Yeah, but if she ran as a Republican, I don't know. That's the key thing. We've never seen a Republican candidate for president that was a woman like her.
That's true, and we haven't actually talked a lot about this on this podcast about how this portrays the woman in politics stuff, but they do such an excellent job of portraying how people respond to an ambitious person, and not just how the people in the movie do, but as you as a viewer responding to Tracy Flick and are kind of bracing yourself and are like, no, chill out and no, this is a lot. And it elicits that response that is true to life.
It's very true. Who won the movie?
Wait, I have one more probably unanswered question
good,
that I wrote down, which is this the part of the reason that you voted for Ralph Nader?
Wow, we're making that public.
Whatever.
No, I can't. You didn't ask me, but I don't remember when I saw this. I was already in a state of intellectual disrepair about American politics by the time I was 14. And I was a very good government student and into U.S. history and very interested in this subject a lot more then than I am now. And I felt like I had been corroded. And I did all the dumb Timothy Chalamet and Lady Bird reading Howard Zinn stuff. And I was very up on that and very aware of it. And I think if your first election was the election of 2000, you probably had a certain kind of consciousness about it. And if you didn't, then you certainly did after the results of it. And with that brought a feeling of undermining the system.
Yeah.
But it was not because of this movie.
Well, no, but I just think the movie does really tap into that particular feeling in that particular time. And also, in the way that it predicted everything else, predicted certain Nader voters. And how that worked out.
It did. And how tricky and arguably dangerous that could be. Though there are still some tenets of his platform that I fully agree with.
Yeah.
Who won the movie besides Ralph Nader?
I mean, Reese.
Got to be Reese. And in some cases, you could make a case for Alexander Payne because even though it wasn't a big success, it calcifies his style. And then he goes on to this actually really impressive run when you look back at history of he does Sideways. And he does About Schmidt, which was a hit. And then he does Sideways, which was a hit. And then he does The Descendants, which was a hit. And we don't have a lot of people like that now who make original or literary adaptations into like $80 million movies. So he benefited, but nobody benefited more than Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah. I mean, it just starts an entire... the career had already started, but it cements her as someone that we have to pay attention to for the next 20 years.
Any lingering thoughts on election? Do you ever wish you could go back to high school?
No.
Me neither. Thanks for listening to The Rewatchables 1999, presented by Luminary Media. We'll be back next week with another iconic film from 1999. Until then, for Amanda Dobbins, I'm Sean Fennessy.